Hare Krishna, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of the Hare Krishna Project podcast. This is episode number 132. A big thank you to everyone who tunes in on a weekly basis from all over the world. I appreciate each and every one of you tuning in. Do not forget, if you're watching this on YouTube, to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, so you can be kept updated about future podcasts and video productions from the Hare Krishna Project. Or if you're watching this on Facebook, which is the other way you can watch this podcast, please do like or follow, if you haven't already, the Hare Krishna Project Facebook page. So you can be kept updated that way about what we're doing at the Hare Krishna Project. As you know, we don't just produce podcasts, we organize Hare Krishna festivals, we give public talks, we do book distribution, lots of things that keep me out of trouble, keep me busy. Okay, it's about time we had a sannyasi on the show again. Every now and then we allow, it's a bit of a strong word, we allow sannyasis to appear like in a puff of smoke. So I'm absolutely delighted. I'm genuinely delighted to welcome our guest this week. It's His Holiness Padmanabha Swami. Hare Krishna, Maharaj.
Hare Krishna, nice to see you. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here. I appreciate the expression of allowing a sannyasi to be there. It's humbling, and I accept the invitation. And yeah, thank you so much. It's my great fortune to be here.
Thank you so much. I think you and I have known each other for about 2 years. We met, it's literally this time every year we seem to connect. That's obviously Krishna's arrangement. 2 years ago, we met at a program in London. And then a year ago, a program in Watford.
You introduced both of them.
Yes, I kind of emceed at both events, and that was an honor to be asked as well. Yeah, I actually forgotten I'd done that, so thank you for reminding me. And now we're finally recording a podcast together. It's a long time coming. So Maharaj, the first question for you is the first question that every guest gets, just to warm us up if you need warming up. Please tell us a little bit about you and where you are from.
Well, I'm from Argentina. So I was born in South America in 1980 on Gopastami, on the occasion of a Gopastami. To counteract probably the inauspiciousness of my own birth, I had to be born on a very auspicious day. And basically, if you want to know a little bit about my devotional trajectory or background, I got to connect with Gaudiya Vaishnavism, with Krishna Consciousness when I was 19. Of course, before, here and there, seeing devotees in the street, receiving some book, but the official connection was when I was 19. When I was in a very huge existential crisis as a teenager, asking all these existential questions: who I am, what's death, what I'm suffering, what to do with my life. And after studying different philosophies from different traditions in the West, in the East, eventually coming more specifically to India, different brands of Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, Advaita Vedanta, and eventually Krishna Consciousness. Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita was the before and after moment, one of the main epiphanies. And after that, I very quickly joined the ashram as a brahmachari, and remained there so far, still there.
Wow.
I mean, not in the same ashram, of course, right? But yeah.
I'm just intrigued. Did you have a religious upbringing? Were you raised in any particular religious tradition?
Well, as most South Americans, I was born Catholic, but more as a social religious dynamics, not so much like practitioners, but all at the same time. I will say that especially from my mom, I received some strong religious samskars or impressions, since when she was young, she wanted to be a nun. So she had this drive for religious life, never like institutionalized religion, but more like the inner search of God and dedication, service. So even though she was not practicing officially something, so to say, when I was born, she had always had her faith and connection with God in place. So I will say that really impacted me. And from my father's side, maybe there was not that much of a religious presence, although he was not a declared atheist, so to say. But he had his values and principles for sure. So I will say all that created a good vessel. And plus all this suffering and crisis that I had gone through life, I think that's also a good portal, a good triggering. Both suffering and love, all the things open the heart to inquire and transformation and paradigm shifts, so to say. So yeah, there was some religious presence, so to say, in my life always. Although I have no problem to publicly confess when at some point in my teenage years, I officially declared myself an atheist for a few years, but it was more like a rebel stance and of course a disagreement with certain ideas of God, not so much with God itself, but what I understood at that time, what other people represent as God, and I felt that cannot be God. And I still agree with that. Sometimes I meet atheists who tell me, I don't believe in God. And I ask them, so what's God for you? And they describe it. And I say, I don't believe in that God either. But that's not God. That's the point. So yeah, that was kind of my background upbringing at that time.
So you joined the Hare Krishna movement when you were 19.
Yes.
And I've just worked out by you telling us what year you were born, 1980, that you're turning, if you haven't already, you're turning 44 this year.
Yeah.
Still quite young. So that's I guess 25 years living as a monk, different ashrams, but a monk. 25 years in the grand scheme of eternity, it's nothing, but it's still an important period of time. 25 years. Why have you chosen? Why did you choose? Why have you continued to choose to live this kind of monastic monk style lifestyle?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And in one sense, I'm not so sure if I will say I've chosen that, but somehow I will say I have been chosen by by the order itself. Not to say that I'm a chosen one or anything like that, but just like you feel just like drawn in some particular direction by some nature, which was confirmed in time for me. I remember some years ago being in India. For some health issues, I got some astrological chart done because some health issues come there. But also the astrologer wanted to tell me some other things. And I told him, I'm just interested in health issue. And he said, one more thing, Maharaj. I say, okay. He told Maharaj, in your chart, you have like the perfect chart for a sannyasi. The planet for romance, Venus, is in the worst possible position. Romance is not for you in this lifetime. And I'm not saying this to say I'm better than anyone. I'm just saying that was somehow already present in my chart, in my destiny. And I can really feel that it's a nature that I have to go in that direction. I never had a girlfriend, boyfriend in my life before being with the devotee, which was strange for me, which was very weird because all my friends, I was a musician at the time. So all my friends will go to concerts and play and all those dynamics in the rock and roll world, so to say. And I never had a boyfriend and girlfriend. So everyone was like, what's going on with you? And I was, I don't know. So whenever I came to meet the devotees and saw the possibility of monastic life, I kind of saw myself there. Look, that's me. Immediately it was like, okay, that's my vocation, that's my lifestyle, that's my nature. So of course, yeah, I began as a brahmachari. I remained brahmachari for 9 years, although I was offered sannyas almost at this second year, which was not, I wouldn't say that's something that you should offer to someone with 21 years. I don't do that. When people come to me telling me they want to be sannyasi, I generally discourage them, or I start to ask from the why you want to be a sannyasi and try to dismiss that in a healthy way, trying to see from which place that's coming, because you may want to be a sannyasi very much for the wrong reason so many times. So I was offered to be a brahmachari, to be a sannyasi, very young age, and a sannyasi friend of mine at the time, I mean, he's still my friend, he told me, why don't you wait for 10 years to see if this fits your nature? So I appreciated his advice. He didn't tell me think for a weekend or for a few months. He told me think for a decade, because this is a lifelong vow decision. So I appreciated that. And I waited for, it was 9 years. and eventually I accepted sannyas, and now it's 15 years after being a sannyas. So again, I think it's my nature, it's my call, it's my vocation. I know that it's just 0.01% of people who may have that vocation, and I don't feel that those who have it are better than those who do not have it. I like to make that clear, because sometimes in our society, there's a strong emphasis on renunciation, on renunciants as higher than non-renunciants. And to be honest, I don't think that's the case. I know many advanced and pure and beautiful souls, women, men, married, etc. In eternity, I like to say, none of us want to be, will project to be a sannyasi in Golok Vrindavan. So to be a sannyasi, to be a monk is not our eternal prospect. So better I don't get that much attached to that. And in terms of choosing that, it's a daily choice, right? Though I have chosen that originally, okay, I'm a sannyasi or I'm a brahmachari, a monk. On a daily basis, I have to renew my vows, like to renew the intention, why I'm doing this. And of course, that changes through time. I'm not the same person that I was 25 years ago, 25 days ago. So on a daily basis, I have to ask myself and have introspection and contemplation. That's part of being a monk. Like, why I'm doing this? So I don't fall into niyamagraha, into doing something without knowing what I'm doing it, or for the wrong reasons, just for position or fame or followers or social privileges. And anyhow, so many things can get in the way. While originally we began this journey with good intention and a heart to serve, sometimes we may be distracted on the journey. And I'm not saying I'm free from that, but yeah, it requires a daily update and a daily inquiry. And it's a daily affair for me, like to keep my vows. It's not just only celibacy, but it's the integrity of why I'm doing this, how to honor my nature, my vocation in service. So yeah, some thoughts in that regard.
Great. Thank you, Maharaj, for sharing that. Much appreciated. Yes, I'm also a child of the 80s as well. You wished me a happy birthday last week. It was a significant birthday to some extent for me, which I'm completely cool with, by the way. But we're both children of the 80s. But yes, 25 years, I guess, living as a monk is a significant period of time. And in all the years I've known you or known of you, you've been a very committed leader within the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, within the Hare Krishna movement. And there's a particular concept I want to talk about now that you've been talking about for years. And it's, whenever I think of you, I think of this concept. For quite some time, you've been a strong proponent of radical personalism. Whenever I hear those words, I always think of you. So tell us, so from a PR perspective, you've done a great job. So what is radical personalism, and how is it, as a concept and a practice, beneficial to our spiritual lives?
Okay. Yeah. Of course, there's lots to say about that, and I've written a whole book about it. Get with me just in case. So this is my answer to your question in one sense. Because there's so much to say, so I'll try to be brief, but I may spend a few minutes trying to flesh out the implications. Of course, for me, radical personalism is, to begin with, it's another name to say the Hare Krishna movement, Krishna Consciousness, Bhakti Yoga, Gaudiya Vaishnavism. It's another way of reframing what do we mean by what we do as Vaishnavas. Radical personalism. We are personalist to the root. Now, the word radical is not a bad word. Sometimes people think radical is something dangerous. But radical comes from the Latin radix, which means something that exists at its very root, to the core of something. So we are personalists to the core. In our ideal as Gaudiya Vaishnavas, in our philosophy of life, we want to be personalists to the very root, the very core. And also it implies that at the very root of reality lies personalism, not impersonalism. Like I always recall one of my main inspirations, Srila Bhakti Rakshak Siddhardev Goswami Maharaj, and he will say that there is a personal conception behind everything, that whatever we may experience is conscious, and consciousness always indicates a person. And he will say that consciousness and personality are the universal basis of reality. And in one sense, we could say, yeah, even in a table, how a table is a person. Well, in every atom of this table, Krishna is there. He declares that this is declared in Brahma Samhita, in other parts, in every atom, God is present. So the supreme person, the most personal of all people, is in every atom. And that's what takes, I don't know, sages in our tradition to address, and in other traditions, to address so-called impersonal entities like rivers or mountains as people, as persons with names, and so on and so forth. So, and of course, we as Gaudiya Vaishnavas, we are worshiping the supreme personality of Godhead. So that's a highly personal concept. We are not worshiping Godhead. We're not worshiping the personality of Godhead, but the supreme personality of Godhead, as Srila Prabhupada will put it. So what does it mean? Not only the supreme personality of Godhead, we're worshiping she who ultimately makes him that, all that he can be, who is Sri Radha, Srimati Radharani. And I like to make a play of words here between radical personalism and Srimati Radhika. She has a radical love for Krishna. She's the supreme goddess. Krishna is the supreme personality of Godhead. She's the supreme personality of the goddess. And I like to connect radical personalism with Srimati radical personalism, right? So my point is, this is a ultra hyper-personalized tradition, which tries to teach us everything. There's a personal conception behind everything. So if I, as a devotee, as a servant, want to worship them, the supreme personality of Godhead, the goddess, I have to develop my own, so to say, supreme personality of myself. Like I have to develop my own personality. I have to refine. I cannot remain a very abstract, half-baked person to relate with someone who is the supreme personality. So what Carl Jung will call individuation. I have to develop my individuality, not in terms of individualism, but in terms of individuation, which is, unpacking and unfolding all that I can be as a person, integrating all the different layers of my being, not only holiness, but wholeness, physical, mental, emotional, psychological, spiritual, all these layers integrated in the context of bhakti. And especially I like to emphasize the point of our humanity. We are not only here for divinity or transcendence, but for humanity integrated with divinity. One is not opposed to others. No? So as I mentioned in my book, the place for humanities in our life has to be such that it puts in context our spirituality. Because we want to serve Krishna ultimately in Golok Vrindavan. That's called the Nara Lila. The human, Prabhupada would call it the human-like Lila. Well, there's, and sometimes we interpret human-like, the like as pseudo-human, half-human, human-like. But I wouldn't say that. It's fully human. The human-like means, the human means fully human, and like means fully divine. That's the Nara Lila of Krishna. It's fully human and fully divine. So if I want to enter there, no, I have to become fully human and fully divine. And like but that's the person's struggle that we may have. As the saying goes, we are not human beings trying to become spiritual, but we are spiritual beings trying to become fully human. And in one sense, it's more difficult to be human than to be spiritual, I will say. So that's something also in connected with the idea of radical personalism. And something also, one of the main points in my book and in the whole presentation is the contrast with impersonalism. Of course, in our tradition, there is a strong opposition to impersonalism. And I like to make that presentation more nuanced in terms of how impersonal we may be at times. No? To oppose impersonalism is not so much about denouncing people outside from other traditions who are officially impersonal, but to detect and denounce the impersonalism that may come in us while we supposedly are radically personal, right? So in my opinion, Gaudiya Vaishnavism is one of the most personalistic traditions, but many times it's represented in pretty impersonal ways. So I try to flesh out that in my book. For example, we can be very impersonal in how we relate to ourselves. To give you an example, impersonalism says, as a doctrine, as a philosophy, says, God has no form, God has no senses. No? Impersonalism presents a senseless God, so to say. So, and by extension, senses include emotions. So God has no sense and God has no emotion. So if we, as human sadhakas, human practitioners, subscribe to that narrative and deny our own emotions, neglect it, repress them, reject them, somehow we are doing the same thing that impersonalism is doing, denying a reality with emotions. So in that case, we are promoting impersonalism instead of our tradition, radical personalism. And many times we do that. Many times emotions are seen as something bad, as something to transcend. And by transcending, we understand, we take it like reject, while transcending is more, for me at least, integrate. And I in my book quotes, even share quotes from Prabhupada, who is saying, like, if you're angry, it's not that you need to reject anger, you just need to know how to express it, and so on and so forth. So we don't need to, emotions are not bad in themselves. We can do bad things with our emotions, but emotions are not bad. The emotions are. We need to know what to do with that. So we can be impersonal in how we relate to ourselves in the name of radical personalism, in the name of Krishna consciousness. We can be impersonal in how we relate to others. Again, we can have this hyper-personalized theology that we have, but we can represent that in a very depersonalized way of relating to those ideas, of relating to one another, with lots of neglect, with lots of lack of commitment, lack of depth, lack of openness and vulnerability and sharing in trust. I mean, I won't enter into the details now. And also we can be very impersonal in how we relate to God. We can have a very fixed idea, put people, not only we put people in boxes and we label people and that's who they are. That's impersonalism, basically. So I say, oh yeah, I know Narada, he's this. That's it. I judge you from what I think you are or from things you did in the past, not allowing you to change and to be someone else different in the present and in the future. So that's impersonalism. But you can do the same with God. You can say, yeah, I know Krishna. Krishna is this, and you put God in a box. And you do not allow God to be all that he can be in your life on a daily basis. So we have to remain open that our experience and notions of God even change, because it's an ongoing relationship that is always unfolding. So if we don't allow that to happen, if we don't allow Krishna to be a person in our lives, to be the supreme personality of God in our life, it's a form of impersonalism, in my opinion. So, but again, I like to emphasize the point of how the two connect with each other, how we relate to God, how we relate to others. If I'm impersonal with people, probably I'm being impersonal in how I relate to God. Sometimes I remember one devotee said, you want to know where is your relationship with Krishna? You can see where is your relationship with the name of Krishna, which is not different from Krishna. And that's a valid answer, of course. But also I will add to that, you know, where is your relationship with God? You see where's your relationship with others. Because if you love Krishna, naturally you have to love everything and everyone else, because everything and everyone else it doesn't exist apart from Krishna. Everything is connected with God. God is the center of reality, and everything else constellates around it. It's interconnected with the center. So I cannot say I love Krishna and I despise the rest of the world. That speaks about how much you love Krishna. So our love for God has to be reflected in how we relate to everyone else. And that's, of course, a tough test. And it's a very telling situation that will show actually where we are. But it's important. No? Like it is said, the highest devotee sees God in everything and everything in God. So he or she will relate to everything accordingly. So for me, it's an important point to have this idea in mind, that, and it's all part of the basis of radical personalism, this interconnectedness, to see the material world, other souls, God, as not separate units, as the Bhagavatam says, Advaita Tattva. Reality is non-dual. Non-dual consciousness. Non-dual doesn't mean impersonalism, and that's an important point that I address in the whole chapter of my book, that sometimes we mistake non-duality with impersonalism, and we reject non-duality altogether. But non-duality speaks about the foundation of reality as being whole, like unbroken, non-separated, and everything interconnected. And we need to establish that first, so we can relate to one another, knowing that we are connected with a common center. So we need to be able to say we are all one, not in an impersonal sense, but we are all one Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. We all belong to one family. The center is one, and we are all connected to that. On that basis, we can relate in a personal way. No, so it's not that by saying we are all one, we are being impersonal. By saying we are all one in the proper sense, that will protect us from impersonalism, so we can relate to one another, addressing our common connection. And one more thing, if you allow me.
Please, yes, go ahead.
Sorry for extending a little bit more, but I cautioned you about it. So related to radical personalism, in introduction to my book, I present a list of things that I try to frame my presentation in terms of, my whole book is about why to stay as a devotee for the right reasons. No, not only how not to live, but also how not to remain a devotee for the wrong reasons, because that can be equally dangerous. No? I cheat myself and I remain externally as an affiliated member, so to say, of the tradition. But internally, I've lost faith. I have no connection. I don't feel growth and progress and inspiration and enthusiasm and awe and wonder. So how much I'm still there, how much I actually belong to the tradition, or how much I'm just trying to fit in, which is a very different thing. Many times we just try to fit into a group, and in order to fit in, we stop being who we are. We compromise our own integrity, which is very different to belong. Belong implies you have to be who you are to belong. Fit in means you have to stop being who you are so you can fit in. So in my introduction, I present this idea that how to stay as a Gaudiya Vaishnava for the right reasons. And I make a list of 10 points. And most people loved it, but some people felt a little bit unsettled by that, because the list begins saying, why not to stay as a Gaudiya Vaishnava? By this, I'm not inspiring people to leave the tradition. I'm just saying how many times the tradition is misrepresented by things that I will share now. This is a list of 10 brief points.
Please.
But these 10 brief points actually are not the essence of the tradition, but sometimes those things come as if those will be the tradition. And they made many people leave the tradition or remain in the tradition for the wrong reasons. So I will briefly go through them. Of course, I cannot explain each of them now. The whole book is for that. So why not to stay as a Gaudiya Vaishnava? This is part of my constructive criticism to the current condition of the tradition in some places. I'm not speaking absolutely, but I'm daring to criticize the condition of my tradition because I love my tradition. So because I love it, I criticize it from that place as a way of further committing myself to the tradition, not because I'm planning to leave it. So why not to stay as a Gaudiya Vaishnava? And this is connected to the impersonalism that sometimes we show as members of this tradition, and radical personalism is an attempt to deal with that. First, lack of human sensibility and psychological balance. Second, tribal thinking, institutionalism, and various types of fundamentalism. Third, unaddressed abuse of different types. Fourth, deep cognitive rigidity and poor capacity for dynamic dialogue. 5, not enough appreciation for other mystical schools. 6, not enough appreciation for other forms of non-mystical knowledge, for other even secular disciplines. 7, chauvinism, institutional patriarchy, and other forms of discrimination. 8, disjointed relationship with matter, especially with one's physical body and its various needs. 9, toxic nostalgia for past achievements and unwillingness to deal with the modern world's paradigms. And 10, over-idealized emphasis on proselytism. Anyhow, there's so much to unpack from each one of those, and that's why I've written a whole book. So basically, a few words in terms of what's radical personalism for me. I hope that makes some sense.
It does. And thank you also for explaining or reminding us the original definition or the meaning of the word radical. Because the word radical can mean different things. And its original meaning is it literally means root, doesn't it? Or to be rooted. Because also radical is used in other contexts. So often you think of politics or social situations, if someone is radical, they want to change things, they want to stir things up, you know, that politician is
Agitate.
radical.
Yeah.
Agitator, yes, so and so is radical. It's a radical idea. So thank you for reminding us of what the original meaning of radical actually is, because initially when your book came out and when you were talking about radical personalism, I was thinking, well, what is Maharaj talking about in terms of he wants to change personalism? He's got some radical ideas that are very political. But actually, you've told us what the actual, in terms of the context of the expression radical personalism, what it's actually about.
Yeah. And I generally try to start my answer when anyone asks me about radical personalism. First thing I do is to make it clear, this is what I mean by radical. Well, because you can say radical love, radical mercy, radical compassion. And the word radical has another meaning in that particular context. So yeah, I totally agree that we need context always to keep things in place. As I like to say, a text out of context becomes a pretext. So
yes,
I appreciate your observation of that. Yeah.
Thank you, Maharaj. So this kind of leads us nicely on to the next question. Last year, you also launched the Free Radical podcast. Please tell us a bit about the podcast and what encouraged you to create it or bring it together.
Okay, thanks so much for that. So the Free Radical podcast, came almost a year ago, a year and a few weeks now. So we were celebrating the anniversary recently. So it came like a natural extension of radical personalism. As you can see, the word radical is again there in the name of the podcast. So it's a natural extension of the conversation, as I try to make the point in my book. My book in itself, for me, is an ongoing conversation. When I wrote my book, Radical Personalism, at the conclusion and in many other parts as well, I mentioned this, and this is not the last word on anything. No, I'm not trying to be inconclusive here and giving you the final word. There's nothing else to say. Just do this. No, it's just an ongoing dialogue, an ongoing conversation. Always. That's how I like to think of life in itself, of reality, of spiritual practice. I don't like to be so sure that I know everything already, because that will be a disaster. That's not humility. No, we are approaching infinity. We are approaching something eternal. So how much we can dare to say, I know it all. I already know what this is about. There's always room for growth and improvement. It's always ever evolving and ever expanding. In fact, that's the third book I'm writing now. We may go there later, but in terms of how everything is in constant evolution and expansion. So we have to keep a proper attitude to that. So for me, the book Radical Personalism, of course, is a book I wrote, it's published, but I try to make it clear this is not the last word. No, each one of us have to write their own book in one sense, even though if you don't write books, but with your life, with your example, we have to bear testimony to whatever resonates with us. So it's an ongoing conversation. So naturally, then after the book, we also opened a Facebook group called Gaudiya Reform Forum, like to continue the conversation in connection to the points of the book, like again, extended conversation. And then the idea came, why not to do a podcast to continue the conversation from that particular side, from that particular place. So for me, the podcast is an extension of the book, and it began as such. The first season, which again began last year, we picked different, first of all, the name of the podcast is Free Radical Podcast. No? So what's a Free Radical Podcast? We already clarified what's radical, but free radical in itself is a word in chemistry. I mentioned that in my book. No? So free radical constitutes like a unit that attacks important macromolecules that leads to, sorry for technical term, leads to homeostatic disruption and ill health. But in our tradition, I explained that in my book, so people doesn't get afraid of listening to the podcast. A radical personalist, I will say, is someone who also embraces freedom, free radical freedom, but also attempts to create some disturbance. Like a free radical creates disturbance in chemistry, I'm trying to create disturbance in a sacred way, not for the sake of disturbance, like for the sake of anarchy. Again, in that sense of radical, but trying to point to the status quo, to excessive complacency and laxity and things that need to be pointed out, that need to be named and framed, as we say, abuse and things that are not helping us, that require update and challenge. In that sense, we create disturbance. Again, it's not disturbance in itself. It's just pointing at what needs to be addressed and changed. So basically, that's how I concluded about naming the book, the podcast, Free Radical Podcast. Let's have some probably uncomfortable conversations and talk on themes that sometimes are taboo or people doesn't like to talk. Again, not for the sake of controversy and confronting people, but just let's bring to the table whatever needs to be brought to the table in this particular time and place we are in. So let's have that open space and have honest, vulnerable conversations and anything. I feel that is helpful for me to begin with, to be in that place, not to put myself into a pedestal where I can only talk on some things and you cannot ask me about certain things because I'm Maharaj and I give you very conclusive answers. And if you tell me something very difficult or uncomfortable, I will say, that's a chintya. I will press the chintya button, inconceivable, and end of the conversation.
I think Maharaj was on a roll and we seem to have lost him.
Of course, help me to help others better, but to put me in conversation with other people is not only me talking. I'm quite accustomed to being myself giving the lectures, but I feel
We seem to have a few technical difficulties.
Very underrated the importance of listening and the art that it is. It's not so easy. It's not just being there waiting for your turn to speak, but it's actually receiving the other person, not judging, not filtering. As Paul Tillich will say, listening is the first step in love, no? And we say Shravanam. It all begins Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu. It all begins with listening. So it's a great, for me, as a personal discipline, I will say, although I talked in the podcast, and probably talk a lot still, but I try to listen and try to learn. I try to learn new things, to be blessed by new people also that I come to know. Mostly I have invited in my podcast in the first season, I have invited friends that I know personally, that I have some deep relationship with, and I want to extend that connection to others. So in that first season, we have been talking about different themes of my book. That's why we call it Free Radical Podcast and an extension of my book. And for every single episode of the first season, we address some of the different radicals that are in the second part of my book. The second part of my book consists of what I will call a manifesto for proactive devotion. And there are different radicals, so to say. No? Again, I'm radical in terms of let's go to the root. Like, I don't know, radical harmony, radical appreciation, radical activism, radical conversation, radical wholeness, and radical guidance, radical remark, radical sexuality. No, again, not in the sense of radical sexuality, like let's do anything, but just let's go to the root, radical, of what sexuality is and how that plays out in our tradition. Radical monasticism is there. So anyhow, for each one of these episodes, I've invited a particular guest to talk. I don't know, I remember Radha Madhav Prabhu. We talked with him on sexuality. We talked with Deva Madhav Prabhu on organization. We talked with Tamal Krishna Prabhu on whatever, prayer, and so on and so forth. So that was the first season. And this year we began a second season, which is not so much limited to one of those radicals, but it's more open to different topics, which still are all aligned with with my book, Radical Personalism, naturally for me, which again, for me, the radical personalism is a way to keep Gaudiya Vaishnavism relevant and relatable. And something that has come naturally with the podcast, two things. One, of course, is for me, it's a chance to learn, but also a chance to extend my sadhu sangha to others, so to say, like the people that I consider inspiring, nourishing, wanting me to let other people know them and benefit from their association. So that's a part of my service. Not only I'm getting benefited by listening and learning and having these beautiful conversations together, but also I'm so happy to know so many people and devotees telling me, oh, Maharaj, thank you so much. I never knew about this devotee. I never knew about this person. It's so incredible. I'm so inspired. So the circle of inspiration and nourishing expands. And so that's beautiful. And something that has happened naturally also, and that's part also of my nature, is like what sometimes is called interfaith dialogue, which I don't like to call it that much in that way, because sometimes interfaith dialogue still conveys the idea of, okay, two people from different tradition get together and talk about their particularities and then they leave, so to say. Like two politicians talking, but each one goes back to their country. And for me, this dialogue is not so much about we are in different countries, but in one sense, we are in the same thing and we are approaching the same absolute reality from different perspectives. So it's more about we are in this together. And I must say, I have beautiful conversations in the podcast with people from Christian tradition. Now, very soon, I will be sharing some episodes with rabbis from the Jewish tradition, and I will even be talking soon with Buddhist nuns and other people from other traditions. So, and of course, we have differences. Like who doesn't? But there is so much in common, and I feel so at home with this, what I may call bridge building, in terms of, yes, connecting with the commonalities and allowing our Gaudiya community to witness those type of conversations and realize, wow, they are not Gaudiya Vaishnavas, but they are nice people. I'm being sarcastic here, no? Because sometimes we may think if you're not a devotee, watch out. But there's so much learning there, so much inspiration, and so many moments I've been with them that we found each other like on the same page, basically. Like I remember having a conversation with Ilia Delio. I always quote this. She's a Franciscan nun, and she's also a scientist and a theologian, a very interesting person. And at one point, I was talking to her about the concept of lila, the pastime or divine play, and describing lila as an action which is not bounded by karma, but it's a celebratory action out of freedom, coming out of love, and so on and so forth. And she's kind of listening and nodding, yes, yes, yeah. And at one point, she's like, I think I'm a Hindu. She was like, because she was agreeing so much with everything I was saying that she was like, I mean, I'm not finding the differences here. And it was beautiful. And I told her, well, when I'm listening to you, I think I'm a Christian in the sense that we are so much in the same page. And again, there are differences. I won't deny them. But also, if we establish the common foundation enough, the difference end up being an ornament, end up being something beautiful. That because there is enough commonality as a foundation. So we are in this together so much that when some different comes, it's not a reason to conflict or fight with one another, but it's just like charming in itself. So that's how it has happened to me when having conversations with people from quote unquote other traditions. And that's a theme I talk also in Radical Personalism, that I personally become very nourished by practitioners from other traditions, and I am able to rediscover my own tradition by what I find in other traditions. So if other so-called other traditions help me rediscover my own tradition, how much I can still call them other traditions, how much I can draw a line of this is different. There may be differences, but there may not be as different as we generally think. So anyhow, some thoughts in what I've been discovering and experiencing through the Free Radical podcast. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I do appreciate it. And with this podcast, I'll put a link to your podcast plus your website, how people can purchase your book or one of your books, and so that people can be kept updated about what you're doing, because you're an activist, a bit like me, I guess, a spiritual activist. You're doing things, which is, I mean, we're all doing things. You're doing things that are meaningful and purposeful, and trying to make a positive difference within the Gaudiya Vaishnava community, which is really important. So we've already talked about you being a published author and writer. You have a love for writing. I can feel that kind of through the internet today. You love writing, expressing thoughts, feelings, and ideas, which is wonderful. So, and you've kind of done this already, but please tell us a bit about your books and what inspired you to write them.
Thank you for the question. It invites me to go to some very dear place inside of me, which is writing and expression, basically artistic expression, creative expression. I always have that need, and I will say, as a monk, I especially have that need. Sometimes I like to describe sexuality as, in terms of energy, sexual energy. So each one of us have sexual energy, including a monk. So we need to express that in a way, one way or another. If I, as a monk, I'm not expressing my sexual energy physically, still the energy is there, and I need to dovetail somehow. So I like to define sexuality in terms of intimacy, creativity, and connection, these three. So whether that's expressed in a healthy, human, balanced way, physically with a partner, committed relationship, or as a monk, I think I have to express my sexual energy in those three ways as well. I have to have intimacy with friends, with peers, in deep relationships, open, sincere, and that keeps me grounded and sober. I have to have experienced deep, purposeful, significant connection, sense of connection with other people, with God, with myself, and also creativity or creation. No? Sexuality has to do with creation, procreation. So sexual energy is about creating. So for me, writing is a way of creation. And literally, for me, my books are like my children, so to say, like babies that are born, and the whole writing process is like pregnancy, like the conception and the child birth and all the child starts to take its own life of its own. Is very different from how I conceived originally. So it's very interesting. And yeah, creativity keeps me very balanced in my monastic life. I always have that drive. Before writing, I was a lot into music, as I mentioned to you, before connecting with Gaudiya Vaishnavism. I'm of course like to sing and compose. We have composed a few albums during the last 25 years with the devotees, but before that it was mostly music. Although I like to write, I remember having some poems published at that time before meeting the devotees in Argentina. So yeah, I feel everyone needs that. Everyone is an artist in one way or another, and everyone needs to express oneself creatively. So writing has been for me lately the main way of expressing myself in those terms. It's a very beautiful practice. It's not easy. It's not that I just sit and start to type and another book is there, no? Because sometimes people over idealizes the life of an author, thinking you just sit and enter into mystical trance and the book gets manifest. And no, sometimes it's a struggle, and you don't know what to say, what to do. You're not inspired, and that takes you to introspection, to prayer, like what's going on, what's happening, what's the obstacle here, what do I need to see, what do I need to acknowledge, how to write in a way that, as I like to call in my book, transpersonal authorship, how to write in a way that is not me writing ultimately, how I become as much of an instrument as I can be in writing. No? I sometimes hesitate in putting my names in the book because I don't like it to be my book. Of course, I take responsibility for whatever is being said there, but also I'm trying to be open to be more of a channel, and hopefully something beyond me can be put into those pages. So yeah, writing for me is part of my sadhana in one sense. It's not so much like a professional thing that I do to earn a living, because I don't earn a living from that. And as a sannyasi, in one sense, I don't care to earn a living. So it's more as something, of course, a service to the community, but as a personal level, part of my life of prayer and creativity and connection. And yeah, and sharing ideas, which I think is very important, and thinking, because to write, you have to think. Now you cannot just write without having thought what you are writing about. So writing forces you to think, and that's important, because if we do not enter into that place of ruminating and processing and analyzing, not to get stuck in your head, but to have some critical capacity and think and analyze, I think is very, very important. So, so that has taken me to write some books. Of course, I've written articles during all this time with the devotees, but somehow a few years ago, 2 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, yeah, I published my first book. Before that, I had not thought about publishing books. I was more writing articles, and of course, giving lectures for me is a form of creative expression also, of writing on the spot, so to say. So my first book is called Inherent or Inherited, Bhakti in the Jiva according to Gaudiya Vedanta. This is more of a philosophical, scholarly book, which nonetheless I've tried to make it as readable as possible. So that was published 2 years ago on the subject of Bhakti in the Jiva, which I think is an important point to analyze the nature of love in connection to us, souls. I think for us, love is a very important thing. So to understand what's love for us in our tradition, how it relates to the soul. And one big part of the book is, although I know it has been controversial for some, although most people have fortunately expressed lots of inspiration and nourishing by the content of the book, I know that for some people it has been a little too many new ideas in one single volume, so to say, or they may have felt challenged. And of course, if anyone had an unsettling moment by reading it and it was uncomfortable, I apologize for that. It's not my intention to put people in anxiety, but at the same time, as I mentioned, I think it's healthy to create some sacred disturbance or some displacement where we are invited to think and to see things from different angles and different perspectives from where we were used to see them. So in my book, in that first book, what I basically do is present this idea, okay, if bhakti is inherent in the soul, in the jiva, or is it something received as a gift? And I present what the scriptures say, according to my opinion, and to what I think the Shastra says and parampara, and then analyze different statements from different acharyas, but there seem to be contradictions in that connection. And I try to address, okay, what to do, and this is in one sense beyond this particular topic, what to do when we find apparent contradictions in the statements of not only different acharyas, but even in one same person saying two different things at different times. How to deal with that? Should we cherry pick the one that is more comfortable for us, or should we try to reconcile and analyze and integrate? So I try to, that's basically the main point of my book, how we can, again, have a conversation, a dialogue, when things are different, when things seem controversial. It's not that, okay, let's not talk about that. That's controversial. Let's avoid, let's put it under the rug. No, let's create a culture when we can talk about difficult things, differences of opinion, in a way that it's not that we are threatening the faith of anyone. We are not offending. We are not criticizing by pointing that things that are there and that sometimes may create confusion for devotees, may disturb the faith even, like, but this is contradictory, how to reconcile. So I personally feel there is a place to write a book like the one I wrote, and that's why I wrote it. And again, fortunately, most of the devotees who have read it really appreciated that. So that was, an interesting period of my life. And then, of course, came Radical Personalism, which was published last year, and which was not a book that I was planning to write, actually. I had a second book in mind, which now is kind of my fourth book, still there, a book on Mahaprabhu and Gaur Lila, and going deep into the significance of Mahaprabhu and Gaur Lila and Navadvip as an eternal destiny, and many other things revolving around the depth and supremacy of Mahaprabhu. That will come eventually. But this second book, Radical Personalism, came kind of it's a surprise, so to say, to me, out of certain life circumstances that I've gone through for the last 2 years. Now, I won't go into the details now here. I assume many people may be aware of that. It became a public issue, but the point is, it was this whole situation that put me into a very unexpected life situation where I was basically, by force of circumstance, invited to recalibrate, as the GPS system says, recalibrate. To recalibrate, who am I now? Where's my position, my situation? How to continue practicing from a place that is significant and relevant for me. So all this, inspiration came to put it in the form of radical personalism, like a version of Gaudiya Vaishnavism that sounds plausible for me. And unfortunately, I'm so happy to say, and again, it's humbling. I'm not saying that from a place of I did it, but it's very humbling that the result of that after 2 years is that it was overwhelmingly positive, of so many devotees writing to me and telling me, Maharaj, this book gave me new hope. The two words that I most heard from the people was hope and relief. Now, it gives me relief. I can also be a devotee. Okay, there's hope for me. There's place for me in Krishna consciousness. I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to be ridden with guilt and shame. There's a place to even love myself in a healthy way, and Krishna loves me unconditionally. And so many things that give me a broader picture, and there's place for being human, and so on. Anyhow, so it has been very humbling, and many people have been inspired with that. So I'm very, very humbled. I'm very happy to be of some service, and still people write to me from different places of the world and telling me that. Some of them tell you, and again, it's not about me being special, but just what happened through me, and what can happen through any of us, of course, in potential. So that has been radical personalism. And now I've finished writing a third book, and now it's in the process of being edited and so on, as I mentioned before, which somehow is an extension of radical personalism. Each book is somehow an extension of the previous one, as I say. For me, the books are ongoing conversations. So I finish one book, and next, and of course, the conversation has to go on. So let's write a second book. So this third book will be about the nature of love as ever evolving, as constantly expanding and growing, and how God himself, because of being in love, of being love himself, is constantly growing and expanding, and not always this fixed in one same position and situation, again, with this idea of putting God into a box. And so if love and God is always growing and expanding and in a process of eternal becoming and unfolding, we as well have that prospect in connection to them. So I try to analyze how love, God, the soul, and even matter, the world of matter in its own way, how it's in unfolding and evolution. So the whole book is about that, about like developing a new, given a framework of looking at life, of reality, at everything as an ongoing process in terms of something that is fixed and already there and changeless, but something that's always growing and expanding. So I try to refer, of course, to our Gaudiya tradition and showing how that's present throughout the scriptures, and also to other mystical traditions, and shows how they also agree with this. So how that's is mostly like a template and a pattern for reality. You know? So that's the book I just finished. And just in case, the one I have in mind for the next, the fourth book will be on the topic of unconditional love, of how we are being loved by Krishna, how our goal of life is to love Krishna, but he already loves every soul. It's not that we have to practice to earn his love, to deserve his love. Because sometimes I've seen that also in the devotee community, the devotees feeling, okay, Krishna doesn't love me, is angry with me, and if I don't perform in a perfect way, he will reject me. And we develop such a strange idea about who Krishna is. So I try to show again from scripture and our tradition and other traditions how we already are being fully accepted by God, fully loved by him. And on that foundation, which is a very healthy and healing and redeeming foundation, we can give back the embrace, so to say, try to love him. So I'll try to talk about that in the book, unconditional love and self-love in bhakti, and what gets in the way of that, of course, guilt and shame and all the things that we as practitioners need to deal with and acknowledge and work with. So anyhow, and then probably the book of Mahaprabhu. Let's see if something else comes in the way.
Wonderful. Thank you, Maharaj, for sharing that. I wasn't aware that you had all these future plans for books, and there certainly is they're on your website or on Amazon. How can people listening to this podcast, how can they purchase one of your current books?
Yeah, they are in Amazon, but yeah, we can share the links maybe in the comment section, something.
Absolutely, great. The other thing that kind of came about last year, I remember from what I saw and what I read and what I heard, last year was quite a big year for you. Kind of astrologically, all these things were happening. And the other thing, and I'm a great believer because I experience it, we all experience it, that positive things always come from negative things. There's always something that, one door closes, another one opens. And last year you started to talk about, and you also launched a new kind of devotional alliance. And I remember the big lead up to the launch. It must have been about a year ago or almost a year ago or something like that. And you launched something called, and I hope I pronounce it correctly, the Tadatmya Devotional Alliance. Is that the correct pronunciation?
Yes, yes.
Great. Now this is wonderful because I personally have an interest in the sociology of religion. My own book was about mats and sanghas and the history of Gaudiya Vaishnavism and how everyone fits together, if they fit together. And so it's a very sad thing, and I'm a typical bloke. I like to put things into boxes, and I loved researching all the mats in Britain and who set them up and everything. And initially, and you might answer this in a moment, I was quite excited. Oh, is this a new mat? Is this an offshoot? And I don't actually know the answer to that. So this is your chance to tell us a bit about the Tadatmya Devotional Alliance. What is it, and what's it all about?
Okay, thank you for your question. And of course, I appreciate also your research work. You gifted me your book on the mats in UK, and I really appreciated that. I mean, I also love research and on all the details of situations like that. So I really appreciated that. So I want to say that as well. So what is Tadatmya Devotional Alliance? Well, that's, again, a big topic. I'll try to be brief. We have a little bit more time, but yeah, I won't overextend myself. So this was actually inaugurated half a year ago, not 1 year ago even. I remember the official launching of it was when I was in New Zealand, and that was in January. So it's approx half a year. So
a lot's happened in the last 6 months. It feels like a year's passed.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, so it's still a baby, crawling baby, learn its first steps. So what's Tadatmya Devotional Alliance? Of course, to begin with, as I always like to define words, Tadatmya is a Sanskrit term, which somehow translates as empathy or sameness. Tadatmya, like oneness with one another, but not oneness in impersonal way, but when we connect with one another deeply and we say we are one, no? Like we were already talking. So it's a very beautiful term that appears in our tradition. So Tadatmya is something, I gave a whole lecture of introducing Tadatmya again in this launching half a year ago. So I there explained Tadatmya can be expressed with one another, deep empathy, deep connection, deep sameness, oneness. It can be connected with Guru, when the disciple can identify with the Guru's gift and see our own potential in what the Guru is showing and exercise Tadatmya. In that we can be Tadatmic with God. Now, what's Krishna's will, and I identify with that, and I become one with that. Or even we have God expressing Tadatmya with God himself in the form of Mahaprabhu, Krishna experiencing the internal mood of Srimati Radharani. In one sense, Krishna and Radha are both God. So we have Krishna being empathizing with God, and that's Mahaprabhu. So in one sense, Tadatmya is also a name of Mahaprabhu. And most Gaudiya Vaishnava groups have a name of Mahaprabhu included in there. So in one sense, Tadatmya is that. So what's Tadatmya Devotional Alliance? It's something that, again, it came very naturally as radical personalism came as an unexpected consequence of life circumstances. Tadatmya, sometimes I call it Tadatmya Sangha as well. Sangha means kind of community. It came like as a natural sprout of my life circumstances after something happened. Again, last 2 years, then I wrote Radical Personalism. And around Radical Personalism, there was a group of friends and brothers and sisters, as I like to call, to create a more circular connection that felt identified with my presentation of Radical Personalism, of being a Vaishnava from that place, so to say. So naturally, it created this group of like-minded spirits that we were revolving around this way of mood of embracing Krishna consciousness. So eventually came the need to give some further shape to this natural sprout that was happening by its own force. So we did this, what I like to call namakarna samskar, or like the name giving ceremony, like when you give a name to a baby or something. Okay, let's give a name to what's going on here, so to say. A natural group is happening, revolving around something. Let's put in a name. Let's create some group identity, some subtle form of giving shape to that. So we call that Tadatmya, no? First the name, as in our tradition, we say Nama, Rupa, Guna, Lila. First comes the name, then the form, the qualities, the lila. So let's begin with the name. Let's put it a name and let's see what comes from that. So we call it Tadatmya and Devotional Alliance. In that presentation I made half a year ago, I made that clear. Tadatmya Sangha is not an institution. It's not a mission. And I'm not the acharya of it. And I know that in itself like kind of deconstructs everything, because we generally tend to think, okay, that's a mission, that's an institution. We have a language to frame and to explain all the things. So, and I know it may even sound abstract to some devotees. So what's that? What's that there? No, so I like to call it a devotional alliance. No, like alliance, no, different people coming together to work for a common teamwork. Like I like to, there's a logo that we have in Tadatmya Sangha, which has a circle, including other circles. So the bigger circle, okay, is Tadatmya Sangha. There are different circles with people coming from other even affiliations, serving together, feeling this particular like-mindedness, a way of practicing and conceiving Krishna Bhakti. So I like to think more in these terms, like more of a circular collaboration, or a spiral, like a circle that keeps expanding, instead of, I don't know, me being at the top of the pyramid, so to say. No, here I'm the boss, or I'm the acharya. I have nothing against hierarchies. I'm not saying in every way they're wrong, but sometimes we can become pretty hierarchical in our tradition also, and that can really affect relationships and feedback and learning from each other. So, okay, I'm the founder of Tadatmya Sangha. I may be the founder, not the founder, Acharya, the founder. But as someone once told me, a friend of mine, who is a founder? A founder is someone who has found something. A founder. No, I have found something, and I'm trying to share those news with others. Hey, this I have found. No, so it's not that I'm anything special or better than anyone else. I have found that by grace, and grace has shown something. I'm trying to point at that. We are sharing that together. So, so that's what we have founded. A devotional alliance is a group of like-minded spirits, not necessarily a mission, not necessarily an institution. And it's, again, before Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, to give you just an example, there were no missions in Gaudiya Sampradaya. No? And before Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, you wouldn't ask anyone, so to which mission do you belong? Because there were no missions. There were basically paribars, different families coming from different associates and different lineages, but there was not like an institution. And again, I have nothing against a mission or an institution. I'm not trying to, I'm not the radical in terms, let's destroy all that. I'm just saying that sometimes we can become also too institutionalized, too missionalized. And personally, I feel it's more, in my case, in my experience, more sustainable and healthy to create this template of a family and a devotional alliance. And also on a personal level, I think I felt that it's good to present whatever I'm trying to do, whatever same service I'm trying to offer, trying to present all this through an identity that is not limited to me. It's not just Swami Padmanabha, the brand. So to say, I don't want to become a brand. So I'm part of something. It's not about me. I'm part of Tadatmya Sangha. So I'm part of something that goes beyond myself. I think that's protective and healing and healthy for me. Because again, I don't want me to become a brand that has some type of followers, and that can very easily happen with Swami figures, so to say. No, sannyasi can very easily end up be put in a box of brand, superhero, who knows what, over idealized, and over expectations come from there, and I can develop this persona that is not who I am as a person. It's my public persona, and it's a very fine line not to identify with that and think that I'm the character. So for my own protection, for my own integrity, I feel also that's healthy. So so this alliance have members from various institutional affiliations. So it's not that I mean, there are devotees who are connected with institutions, who are initiated in different missions, so to say, but at the same time feel identified or inspired with the presentation of radical personalism, feel this Tadatmya empathy connection. So they have found their family here. So, and I think there is place for that. No? There is place to belong, to be part of an institution, but to belong to a particular group of people. Again, I make the difference between fitting in and belonging. And as I like to say, you can never belong to an institution. You can only belong to people. You can only belong to hearts. And if that hearts happen to be beating in a certain institution, I may end up joining the institution because of that hearts that is beating in a certain way that makes my own heart beat. But I don't belong to the institution as an abstract thing, but to, again, to people, to persons. That's radical personalism. So I know, again, that may be difficult to conceive, the idea of this is not an institution. I really like to emphasize this point that I call trans-institutional commitment. Like, we are here to be committed to an ideal that goes beyond the institution, that goes beyond the formality. We may be affiliated with an institution, but the commitment is in terms of the ideal of Krishna consciousness, of Krishna bhakti, of love of God. That for me is a whole new level of affiliation that we need to enter into. And it's not new, it's old, but we may need to remind ourselves about that. We are joining a lifestyle, an ideal, not so much an institution, a building, a paper, a set of whatever rules, what to do, what to do, not to do, but an ideal, and everything else has to be aligned with that. So for me, the devotional alliance that Tadatmya is, how to say, as I like to say, giving ourselves permission to continue having conversations that probably didn't happen before, or must to continue happening, and to create some safe space so the members, or whomever feels a member, can be vulnerable, can be themselves, do not need to perform. No, bhakti doesn't have to be performative, it has to be transformative. So I think it's necessary to create a social dynamics where people feel, I can be myself, as simple as that sounds, and as difficult as sometimes that is in certain devotional institutional dynamics. I can be myself with all my messiness, all my brokenness, all my stuff, and I'm being accepted, and I'm being loved, and I'm receiving support to change what needs to be changed, but I'm already loved to begin with. And people is honest and vulnerable and transparent, and that's the actual virtue, and that's what we are being invited to in the circle, not so much to fake, to put facades, to put our best Sunday feast smile, so to say, but to have deep, profound, meaningful conversations, and whatever needs to be talked can be talked in confidence. So so that's basically what Tadatmya is for me, and how to be part of such a thing. Sometimes people ask, and I sometimes like to say, well, you don't need to sign any paper, you don't need to be initiated by a particular guru or be part of any specific institution. You just need to resonate with the principles of radical personalism, or how our attempt to approach Gaudiya Vaishnavism and spirituality in general in the way we're doing, which is hopefully in a relevant, relatable, honest, profound way. So if that's one's mood, in one sense, you're already part of this devotional alliance, even if you don't know it about it. So that's what Tadatmya Sangha has been doing. And just a brief mention of what we are trying to offer as in terms of activities to the world and society. For example, we have been doing weekly public istagostis, or meetings of Q&A, questions and answers, both in English and Spanish, because as you remember, I'm from Argentina, so somehow half of my people, so to say, are from Spanish-speaking countries. I've lived in South America mostly for my first 20 years as a devotee. The last 5 years, I keep traveling around the world. But again, I have lots of friends from Spanish-speaking audience, so I try to balance my presentation in both languages. So on a weekly basis, we are offering istagostis on Q&A in Spanish and English. Those who would like to join, they are invited to do so. We are offering also classes twice a month, every 2 weeks, by different speakers, again, from different affiliations and topics that hopefully they are relevant. or some monthly presentations, which is a whole theme presented every week for a whole month, but different speakers. Also, we are having more personal, private circles of sharing, like women's circle or men's circles, Vaishnava circles, but when we can share in a more empathic and personal way. And of course, the Free Radical podcast is there. And we have a monthly newsletter also. So we will maybe share the link eventually if someone would like to receive any further news. There's a YouTube channel of Tadatmya, Instagram account. And again, anyhow, there are other plans for the future, like parikrams to the Dham, pilgrimage, and yearly journals, other publications, and retreats also that we make, like the one I'm planning to do in the UK version as well. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Maharaj. I really appreciate it. But before I ask you about your upcoming trip to the UK, one of the question that I want to ask you, and you just used the expression "my people." My people are from. Do you have disciples in this? I mean, that's a broad term. Disciple can mean different things to different people.
Yeah.
Do you have disciples in I guess in that formal Diksha sense?
No. I mean, at least that's not what's going on in the present moment. I'm not having any particular plan. And for those who know my personal life dynamics and the chapter, I mean, at present, it's also a particular interesting transitional situation, liminal space. So it's not something that I'm thinking of. Of course, it's paradoxical because there is people contacting me, writing to me, people I know, people who is close to me, who are asking me about that, if I'm planning to do so, or people who, consider me their guru. Of course, again, this is whole thing. What's guru? It's another complete separate podcast we may need to do, but what's guru? How it's interpreted, because many times we hear guru and we just limit it to Diksha guru, but in our tradition we have Siksha guru, and it's such a broad thing. Eventually in the Bhagavatam it's saying you cannot learn everything from one guru. You can have many gurus. The Bhagavatam even will say that give this list of 24 gurus, and most of them happen to be non-human. Many of them are water, fire, earth, animals. And when it goes to a human, it's a baby or it's a prostitute. So the concept of guru is very broad, actually. Ultimately, everything should be guru. Everything should be teaching us something. Guru ultimately refers to this principle of revelation and teaching and learning. It may begin with one particular person, but that person has to show us how everything is guru. Srila Siddha Maharaj will say we are expected to enter the land of gurus, where everything is guru, even the land, the soil. So, when someone asks me, Maharaj, can you be my guru? You can imagine it's a particular situation. I've been there and I'm there, people asking that. So I'm not giving Diksha, but I also don't want to dismiss the inspiration that someone may have felt through me. I don't want to deny that. It's not my own creation. It's some grace that may come through me. And that's also humility to acknowledge that. So I try to take responsibility for the faith of that person. So if someone's faith has been somehow nourished by something I've been able to say, I am committed to serve that faith, basically. So even if I'm not given Diksha, at least for the time being, that's not happening. But nonetheless, I try to make clear to that person, I'm there for you as a friend, no? Because even if I say as a guide or as a guru, for me, that also equals as a friend. No, the guru is to be a friend. Rupa Goswami said, Vishram Bena Guru Seva. One has to serve the guru in a friendly way. No? So it's important to see that relationship in friendly terms. I'm here now in Sweden, as you know, visiting some of the followers of Sadhananda Swami, and he will say very beautifully about that. Not like he was a guru, he gave initiation to a few, but he gave Diksha. And he will say, I'm your friend. No, I see myself as a friend of yours, accompanying you on the journey and trying to support you and to nourish your faith. So that's for me a very beautiful way that I identify with as my role as a mentor, if I may use that word, a spiritual mentor, a spiritual companion that is trying to accompany other people in their journey, as I need to be accompanied. Again, it's not just about me helping others. I also need help. I also need nourishing and guidance. We all need. It's not that at some point I only give and I don't need anything. We all need. It's always beautiful to learn and to be accompanied. So yeah, that's what I am at the present moment, and how I try to serve in that capacity. For me, guru is a servant, a humble. Not only the disciple is a humble servant of the guru, but the guru is a humble servant of the disciple. A guru is a humble servant of the faith of the student, of the potential of the student. So the guru is a facilitator of the potential of each soul that comes to him or her, just to make that clear, him or her. And yeah, in my book, in Radical Personalism, there's a whole chapter on Guru Tattva that I try to address some of these perspectives and even some other quite unusual situations in terms of relationships between guru and disciple, and how sometimes, yeah, if we don't have a proper conception, guru-disciple relationship can become even cultish or dangerous or toxic or unhealthy. So what we can do to prevent that. Anyhow, that's where I am now.
Thank you, Maharaj. I appreciate that. And I wanted to particularly emphasize by using the term Diksha and how we understand Diksha instead of Shiksha, because I'm sure that you will have many Shiksha followers. I mean, that's a more, it's not a broader term, but it can be used more regularly because a lot of devotees will, not always, but generally have lots of maybe Shiksha gurus in their lives, and maybe only one Diksha guru. That's not always the case, but that's generally how devotees will, read their own lives. And the first ever, I remember when I started the research for my own book in 2019 about mats and sanghas and institutions, and the very first devotee I interviewed was a disciple of Srila Narayana Maharaj in the UK called Madhu Prabhu. And he sat me down on the sofa and he said, what the problem is, Narada? Institutions aren't originally part of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. So actually, you're gonna really struggle with this. Or your book sounds fantastic, but institutions aren't part of our tradition. So it's only a relatively modern thing with the creation of the Gaudiya mat and then the offshoots and everything. So, and that conversation with him 5 years ago helped me just to kind of steer my own thinking in a much more balanced and objective way, that I shouldn't go looking for mats. I'm actually looking for something different, So yes, I agree with, I think, everything you've just said. So thank you for that. You've also just alluded to the fact that you're coming to the UK, back to the UK soon. You seem to visit around this time every year. Please tell us a bit about your upcoming trip this autumn. I know autumn is a while away yet. And will there be opportunities for people in the UK listening to this podcast to come and meet you?
Yeah, okay. So thank you. As I was mentioning before, as part of our Tadatmya Sangha activities, we organize some retreats around the world, and this will be one. My visit to the UK will be a whole retreat revolving around radical personalism. And around Tadatmya Sangha, because in Tadatmya Sangha, we have established like 7 main pillars. And those 7 main pillars are the 7 themes of the third part of my book, Radical Personalism. The book is divided in 3 parts. So the last part of the book, the third one, has 7 chapters, and each chapter is a theme. And naturally, it was not planned, but eventually that ended up being the 7 pillars of our Tadatmya Sangha. So we'll have a retreat in UK, a 1-week retreat, almost a little bit more, 9-day retreat. And each day we'll be talking on one of these 7 pillars. I will mention them briefly just for the people to know. First pillar is the vulnerability leads to actual empowerment. Real empowerment that we need comes from being vulnerable first. Second is about individuation, or the responsibility to develop our full potential as individuals. The third one, also touch upon that, is on non-duality as the fundamental basis of reality. The fourth one is about the guru-disciple relationship that we just touched, that we are students forever, the importance to remain in that spirit, both as disciples and gurus. The fifth one, we haven't gone there that much today, is embracing mystery and coexisting with the unknown, how to learn, not have this certainty addiction that everything has to be figured out and clear, but learning to coexist with what goes beyond our control. And the sixth is prayer, integrating prayer into the fabric of our inner life. the importance of having a prayerful life. And the seventh pillar or topic is recognizing the sanctity, the sacredness within the material world, like reclaiming and redeeming our relationship with matter that sometimes I will say is pretty damaging in some Gaudiya circles in terms of seeing matter as profane and worthy of rejection instead of as a sacred energy to be honored. So we'll be talking about each of these 7 topics during 7 days. I'm arriving to the UK on September 23rd, and I'll be staying there till October the 3rd. So it will be basically 10 days I'll be there. So yeah, if someone would like to to be part of the retreat, I don't have now with me the address of the specific place, but you can ask me, people can contact me. We will be sharing some contact information, so you can contact me, and you can be part of the retreat, even if you cannot be part of the whole retreat for 1 week or something. If someone would like to visit for a day, or even you may like to share personally on some moments in between the retreat, I'm also, of course, willing and open to discover new friends and establish new alliances in this situation. So, but mostly I will be lecturing in that particular setting. It's kind of a countryside place that we are getting for the retreat to create an experience of retreat per se. And we may have some 1-2 programs more apart from the retreat in some nearby areas. So yeah, whomever would like to see, you can contact. And yeah, and I will be in other places in Europe before UK. So if someone listening to the podcast is in some other places, like, I don't know, Switzerland or France, Spain, Italy, Belgium, and those are other places I may be visiting before reaching the UK.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that, Maharaj. I really appreciate it. And I guess, yes, I wasn't necessarily expecting you to give the address of the house that you're staying in. But yes, I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to try and come and see you on one of those days. One of the members of your team has told me about it, and I'm hoping to come for at least one of those days. Of course, I don't know where in the UK it is. Could be anywhere, but hopefully I get to visit on one of those days. Believe it or not, Maharaj, we've been chatting. We've certainly been recording this episode of the podcast for 90 minutes, pretty much to the dot. That's when we were chatting before, and I said, "Hey, let's go for 90 minutes," and literally to the minute, we're almost there.
Incredible. Yes, as we were talking before the recording, I have some inner clock for knowing when we reach the 90-minute limit.
Yes, it's amazing, actually, and I'm really pleased that we finally found the time and the day and the date to record this podcast. It's been long overdue, and I will put all the links to everything that needs to be shared. And I just want to say I really appreciate what you're doing, and I really admire what you're doing. I think what you're doing is quite radical in the in the more political sense. It's radical, it's new, it's progressive. That's a word we've not used in this podcast. I often think of you when I think of the term progressive Vaishnavism. That's another kind of buzz term in the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, certainly in the Western Hare Krishna movement. There's a lot of voices that are, I'm talking camps now, kind of more progressive Vaishnavism camp. I would certainly put you in that camp with other leaders as well. And, and I appreciate a lot of the things that you've said over the years, certainly around the issues of progressive Vaishnavism, and they've certainly helped. Most of us are not interested in, putting on dhotis necessarily, or having to abandon the culture that we grew up with, or things like that. And so I just appreciate what you're doing, and the Tadatmya Devotional Alliance is a new idea, and I'm pleased that it exists, and I'm pleased that you are welcoming back devotees that have maybe lost their faith in the past, or found that they didn't belong previously. And so I think it's great what you're doing.
Thank you for your words. I really appreciate them. They're humbling and they're encouraging and inspiring. And of course, I would like to say in return that in the same way, I really appreciate what you are doing, and I appreciate the content of your podcast, and I mean, I could have copy paste what you just say to me and repeat that back to you, because I really feel that you are also trying to do a very substantial contribution and invitation to the community to really think for themselves from different angles. And by the few things also we shared before this recording, I can also see that on a personal level, we are in very similar spaces in terms of life circumstances. And so that's also takes me to further appreciate you, because I can really understand what you are, where you are in some level, because I'm in a very similar space. So it creates this like-mindedness that is so important, so healthy. And that's why I'm here today in your podcast as well, right? It's not that I'll go to every invitation I may receive, so to say, if I don't feel comfortable and that the place is a place that aligns with values and ideals. But I feel here we are pretty much on that same page. So I'm very honored to be here.
Thank you, Maharaj. Just out of interest, which month is your birthday?
On a solar calendar level, as I told you, on a lunar calendar, I was born in Gopastami, which changes, of course, but on a solar calendar level, I was born November 15.
Oh, I just wondered if we have the same star sign, but I don't think we do. It's actually very different. But anyway, we're obviously very similar on other levels. Maharaj, I'm just going to say goodbye to the viewers at home, and then you and I can have a brief debrief after, before you rush away as to what you're doing in Sweden. So a huge thank you to His Holiness Padmanabha Swami for being our guest on this week's podcast. I really appreciate him giving up his time, and I really appreciate his contribution today. Do not forget, if you're watching this on YouTube, to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and if you're watching this or if you're watching this on Facebook, to either like or follow, if you haven't already, the Hare Krishna Project Facebook page. Those are the two ways you can watch this podcast. And also, I say this every time, I love to receive constructive feedback. In fact, you can say anything you want within reason, as long as it's constructive. I love to hear from people. I love to know what you think about, well, a lot of people tell me what they think about me. But, slopey shoulders, not thick shoulders, but slopey shoulders. And what you think about what we've discussed today. Some of the ideas that Maharaj has talked about might be new to you. So feel free to visit Maharaj's website. The links will be with this podcast and his Facebook group, and read his books. Absolutely read his books. So fantastic. So until next week, I'll see you all soon. Thank you. Hare Krishna.